According to the internets, a villain is the antagonist of a story whose motivations and actions oppose the protagonist and drive the plot of the story. A villain is the opposite of a hero in contrast to the hero, and a villain is usually compelled by desire to commit acts of cruelty and immorality. So tonight we're talking about the antagonist, the villain, the bad guys, right here on tonight's deep dive. Doodler, do the doodling. Start with you. Jake, we'll start with you. What makes a great villain to you?
Oh man. I mean, it's a lot, but for me, they gotta have style. That's my first thing with a good villain. Like my favorite ones, I love an eccentric villain. That's why the Joker's always been kind of one of my favorites. I don't want to be the basic bitch that loves the Joker, but I have so much Joker paraphernalia, and so, but it's it's also the agent of chaosness. Like just somebody who is just all like dude, there is no structure. Like fuck it, like let's burn it all down. But that said, I do like a good relatable villain too, and I don't find the Joker to be relatable in any way, right? But I think that there's a lot of villains who do have relatable aspects, which I think is something obviously we're gonna get into. But I like the one who's like makes you go, "Damn!" Kind of get what they're saying, and so that's what makes a great villain to me, anyway.
Yeah, no, Kev, well, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I totally agree. I think it's the duality, like, I think it's that. Yeah, we know they're terrible shit human beings, but at the same time, they're kind of right. It's the philosophy wasn't off; it was just the execution, like Thanos, or yeah, people like that. I think it's just more so it's when the villain, it's sort of a trend that you notice, I think, in more modern sort of epics, if you will, where things aren't black and white, there's gray, and those villains are in the gray area where the hero is usually operates in the black and white. And that gray area, I think, is relatable to most people. And I think if the villain is there, it's like, damn, this person has to be stopped at all costs, but they're going to make us do some self-reflecting.
Yeah, for sure. When we talk about the villains, Paradise Lost comes to mind for me. I think of antagonist and protagonist and where villains fit. When you look at Paradise Lost, some readers consider Satan to be the hero or the protagonist of the story because he struggles to overcome his doubts and his weaknesses and accomplishes the goals of corrupting humankind, right? The whole point of Paradise Lost is like you kind of fold the book up and be like, okay, who's the hero, right? And if you look at that part of the biblical story, I mean, you could easily say Satan's the hero. This goal, however, is evil, of course. Adam and Eve are moral heroes, and at the end of the story, they help begin humankind's slow process to redemption and salvation. And Satan is far from being the story's object of admiration, as most heroes are. Yet, there are many compelling qualities to his character that make him intriguing to readers. With that said, what is the difference between a villain and an antagonist? Are villains always the antagonist, or can they be the protagonist? Kevin, we'll start with you first.
I don't think so. I think there's instances where I think the villain's always going to be the villain, but I think the villain can sort of antagonize the protagonist to a point where they make the hero not, or I guess tarnished in a way where there's like, oh, this person isn't, they're just self-righteous. They're not this sort of pristine, beyond reproach, serving justice and kind of person, I guess. I think in a way, like you said, they hold up a mirror. I think the villain, especially good villains, they hold up a mirror to the protagonist, and you see a lot of the flaws of the protagonist or the world in which they operate, which allows them to be the protagonist. Like, and I know it gets a lot of flack, but like in Ultron, right? The whole point of that movie was, the Avengers are essentially in this sort of nuclear response that Shield has caused with the Avengers is creating this world around them, right? It's the same thing. I mean, it's basically the same thing from Dark Knight, right? Joker was like, I exist because of Batman. So it's that sort of thing. I think that I don't think they ever fully cross into hero mode, but I think as far as heroics go, I think they in their best attempt they tarnish the protagonist in some sort of way.
For me, I think, and this is kind of answering the question we just asked, but I didn't really answer it myself. One of the things that I think makes a great villain is completely and totally challenging the hero, right? The Joker is a great villain to Batman because he's a complete mirror to Batman, right? He is chaotic and funny and takes things in a very lighthearted sense, whereas a lot of people out there, or Batman, sorry, not a lot of people, Batman is very, he's just, but he's also dark and somber and serious. They're like complete mirrors of each other, and because of it, they challenge each other's aspects. It's kind of like, is there dark without light kind of thing, and characters that really bring that out in the protagonist, I think, make really, really good villains. As far as a villain being an antagonist, I mean, I think that Paradise Lost is a great example of a villain being a protagonist. I think the Loki series is a great example of a villain being a protagonist. So I think that the while the two are usually the case, right? It's usually the villain that's the one that is kind of challenging the hero. It doesn't always have to be the one that's challenging the hero and thus challenging the plot line and being the antagonist, in my opinion. Jake, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, like I think I thought about this one a lot, and one of them being Walter White. Breaking Bad is a great example of where this guy is definitely kind of a villain. He's pouring crystal meth into a community, like fueling a drug epidemic. At a point in the series for his own financial gain. No longer, it crosses a point where it's no longer just for cancer, treatment and stuff like that anymore, or even just setting up his family. At one point, it's because he wants to be fucking Heisenberg, right? And so he becomes a full-on villain. And yet he's still, somebody who we think is as the protagonist, right? And so I do think the villain can be the protagonist. I think a lot of times they are still like aspects of an antagonist because they're obviously like, the bad guys and they're antagonizing someone, kind of a thing. And I think a lot of people try to relate more closely to the protagonist, right? And I think somebody made a good point where like we do call them anti-heroes, and I know we're getting to that later, but like another movie I think of is Megamind, right? Megamind is supposed to be about this supervillain who is doing all this evil stuff, but then he ends up being the fucking hero. And so that's kind of like movies where I think of, but I think Breaking Bad's a better example where of a villain being the protagonist in a story.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. I don't think they always have to be the antagonist. But in this case though, do villains remain villains if they are the protagonist? Right? We have clear stories where they are the protagonist, but are they still villains at that point? Kev, we'll start with you.
I mean, I guess by definition, no. But then that means, I guess if they cross over into that territory, maybe it's like then there are no good guys and there are no villains. We're just operating in a world to which we try to exist in the best way possible, right? Like maybe, like for instance, I think like the best, like a line that sticks out to me was in The Last Jedi, where the guy Benicio del Toro's character, I forget his name, but when Finn and I forget her name too, but they were on the ship and they're coming back, right? And they're on the guy, and they were talking with him, whatever. And he shows up these schematics, and he's like, "Look, the Resistance, the Order, they're all selling weapons, blah blah blah. They're all involved in some shady shit. Good guys, bad guys, they don't exist, right?" Like that was basically his point. And I think like in those situations, then it just becomes sort of a matter of perspective, like which side are you on?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that protagonist and antagonist are not synonymous with hero and villain. I think we've gone through that a lot at this point. Protagonist and antagonist is really on the lines of the story and who moves the plot forward and who is resistant to the plot moving forward. And so in that way, I think that they can remain like I still think Walter White is a villain. Yeah. Right. And I think that he's clearly the protagonist of the story. He's clearly the one that you're rooting for. And so I think they can be the protagonist, but I think honestly the best villains are the antagonists, but they have such a good point that you actually agree with them too. Those are the best villains in my opinion.
Well, 100%. It's the ones that you can kind of like relate to, and you're almost like, oh man, like, I don't want to say relate, because I don't think you would ever want to relate to somebody who's a villain, so to say. But I think like you can relate to their reasoning behind their actions, right?
Yeah.
So
it's tragic, right? Like it's a tragedy. Like
Yeah.
you understand where they're coming from, but it's just this isn't how you process your emotions differently. Like, right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's like another movie that I think of is Joker. Obviously, Joaquin Phoenix crushed that shit. The protagonist of the whole movie is obviously a Joker, and he's a crazy. He's losing his shit. To say, and so like you're not supposed to want to be like Joker in Joker, right? But you're also supposed to kind of think of like, oh man, there are a lot of people who society looks over and turns away from and doesn't give help to, and without like helping those people within society, we get people getting shot on television, kind of a thing. Like you're kind of like supposed to, at least run that shit through your head and go, all right, like yeah, maybe there are some aspects of modern day society that could be fixed, and so. You're not supposed to necessarily like be like, oh, take everything down, burn the system, but you definitely want to at least take a hard look at the system, right? And so I think, villains can still remain villains. They can still have their bad aspects, even if they are the protagonists. But I think that just like leads to the grayness of everyday life in general, right? Like, not everything's as black and white as good and bad.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Also shout out to that spicy dino for the sub. I appreciate that. We all appreciate that. Saw that it come through. Yeah, that was nice. All right, so the spicy source, right? So our next question here, though, we've been talking a lot about protagonists and antagonists and villains and good villain and all this kind of stuff, but we've also kind of fiddled around the line of anti-hero. I think it was actually Savage earlier in there that said, we always call villains that are the protagonist anti-heroes. What is the difference between a villain and an anti-hero? Jake, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it is the classic Deadpool or, even Megamind, like I mentioned earlier, any of those that they start off with usually negative or selfish kind of like goals, or they either want something that's just for them. It's not for the betterment of humanity. It's not for the betterment of anybody else, really. Even though it may be under the guise of that. But at the end of the day, it's selfish. But then for them to be an anti-hero, they learn from that selfishness and end up helping others. Right? Like Deadpool ends up connecting with people, making friends, saving people, even when he's, supposed to kind of be a mercenary, if you will. And so it's one of those where like, mercenaries don't necessarily go around saving people unless they're paid explicitly for that. And so, but he finds himself doing it because he eventually cares for people. And so I think that's the difference between a villain and an anti-hero, is that I think a lot of villains, true villains, their core, what they want to do at their core is villainous. I think for an anti-hero, at the end of the day, they are still capable of change. I think villains are people who, maybe we even agree a little bit with what they kind of say in a way, but even if you did disagree, you couldn't get a word in edgewise. That's a true villain, somebody who's just incapable of change, and anti-heroes can change.
To me, I think that an anti-hero is more someone who can be a protagonist or an antagonist, dependent upon the plot line, dependent upon the scenario. One of the biggest anti-heroes I think of is Deadpool. Because Deadpool is going to do what Deadpool wants to do, regardless if it's a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. And like, he obviously has a moral, guideline, right? But it's not like, morally verse, but but it's not like super rigid, and to a point where it's going to, he's far from Batman, right? And so to me, an anti-hero is more of someone who's kind of like morally neutral, but it's still a big force in the plot, right? Is going to move things forward. It's definitely not someone just walking by on the street. They're not an anti-hero, but someone who has the ability to move the plot forward, but can move it either good or bad, dependent upon the scenario, because they're only going to apply to their own impulses. Kev, would you define it any differently?
Yeah, I think, like you said, kind of like what Jake was saying, was like anti-hero, and you were saying like they could be either or. It depends which way the wind's blowing, I guess, or which way they're deciding to go. But I think
They're my
like Jake was
hero.
saying, right, like villains are, villains and heroes, they have their ideology and they're rigid in that. And I think anti-heroes are just it's more of a self-fulfilling ideology, right? And I mean they all kind of are. It's just I think anti-heroes are more about themselves, right? Like for instance, heroes and villains for the most part think that they're doing something for the greater good in their own mind, right? A great villain
Right.
doesn't see themselves as a villain, and in most instances, it's just they're defined by their actions. Where an anti-hero is, like you said, is a mercenary, where it's like, I got to pay some bills. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Punisher, you killed my family, eye for an eye.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, if you're in my way, then anybody else be down.
Right.
Right, like these people, but at the same time, like they're more like they've gone down this hole where they see themselves more or less as like a tool of their own either
Vengeance.
destruction or form of justice, right? Where it's like you tell me which way to shoot, and that's where I'm going to shoot.
Yeah.
I'm an extension of the user.
Makes sense. No,
Yeah,
I agree with that. I think an extension of they're just basically a gun,
right,
essentially.
right. There's no
Um,
anti-villain.
yeah,
Or
there's
is
no
there?
anti-villain. Um, that's a good way of putting it. I think
Yeah.
anti-hero is just something to say like it's not a villain, but it's not a hero. I think that's what the anti
Yeah.
comes from in hero, if I had to
I think
guess.
it's
Yeah.
the duality of them. The
Yeah.
character themselves can be good and bad. There's good and bad aspects. Whereas a
Yeah.
villain, at the end of the day, I think is not necessarily like all bad, but their intentions are almost always self-serving.
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree. A lot of people say that a good villain has to be relatable, though, and I do think that that's true. There are a lot of villains who are compelling for just that reason. But another strategy for creating a compelling villain is to create someone that the reader truly hates or fears. And so, with that, I want to ask Jake, who is your favorite villain and why?
Oh man, I mean, like I said, I think it's kind of what makes a good villain. Earlier, one of my things was style. Like I said, I love the Joker. I think the
Yeah,
reason why Joker's always been a great villain for me is it's not just that Heath Ledger set it off, because I love Jack Nicholson's. Like that was my first Joker that I really was like fuck yeah, and the animated one that Mark Hamill did, obviously.
Mark Hamill. Yeah,
It was the oppositeness of the polar opposite of Batman, in a way that the agent of chaos with a little bit of flair. That's why I've always liked Joker. I think my second one would be Thanos, which DC and Marvel back to back, right? But I've just always I always really enjoyed Thanos as a villain. I think he's got the style with all the gold and everything. And he's making fucking dope ass gauntlets, and shit too. But he's got a little bit more of a actual moral code, right? Where the Joker is literally just like, hey, what the fuck am I feeling today, baby? We'll just see how it goes. And so I love the random chaosness of the Joker and his overall flair. I think that's what draws me to him and why he's one of my favorites. But then I also love the tacticalness with the eccentricness of a Thanos. And so
yeah, Thanos was a good one too. Thanos is a good one.
Mhm.
Kev, you got a favorite villain?
I'd say I mean, God, I don't want to say Joker because which is
oh, you can. People love him.
man, people love him. I know.
He's a good one.
I'm trying to think.
Society.
Yeah. I mean, that
He's one of the most
to me,
quotable.
that's kind of like, I guess, if you will, the sort of, um, I guess the motto of what it is, or someone like Magneto, who's literally just fighting for mutant rights. Like
True.
maybe he's a little extreme in his methods, but his intentions, right? Like they make Magneto out to be like some type of eugenicist, right? Where he's like, only mutant should exist. No, he's just
Yeah.
like, yo, leave us the fuck alone. Like you're not gonna disrespect us. Like, here, we're stronger than you. Let me show you.
Right. Yeah, Magneto was right. I used to play that song on the radio all the time. It
Yeah.
was a song called Magneto was right. uh, but I think that those are great attributes of villain. Thanos is a great villain. I thought the way that they did him. I really liked original comic book Thanos though, and the reason that comic book Thanos was so interesting to me was because he was the cosmic simp, right? That was who Thanos was. He had the Infinity Gauntlet, and the whole point of Infinity War was so that he could impress death. And just that kind of magnitude,
Yeah.
whittled down to those kind of elements, I think make a great villain. Ultron is another one you mentioned earlier. Dude spends 5 minutes on the internet and decides the entire humanity needs to die. That's fucking relatable. You know,
I love those kinds of villains. Like to me, those are my favorite because it's literally like Ultron was just literally a reflection of humanity. He was a reflection of his creators, right?
He really was.
And ironically enough, he becomes the villain because of that.
Yeah,
like he holds up the mirror and everyone's like, "Oh shit, we got to get rid of him."
But if I had to pick like a unique one out there that has always been one of my favorite villains, it is Purple Man, because it's so simple and it is such an incredibly crazy power to imagine. You know, just the fact that literally anything he says, you do. I mean, watching him in Jessica Jones, not to mention David Tennant playing him, but even before David Tennant was playing him, just the concept of that to me was so incredibly powerful. And the storylines that you could do with a villain like that, I think, is incredible because it's very metaphorical in a lot of different ways. And I think that I love when stories play on metaphors to show us something about what's really going on in our world today. And I think that Purple Man was a great way of doing that. Obviously, you know, Ledger's Joker is a great one. Mark Hamill is obviously the GOAT when it comes to Joker. But like, even some of the ones that we have in our graphic over there, Peacemaker is another one that I wanted to mention because like Peacemaker was a really good villain, even though he was a protagonist in the story, because he was dogmatic and realistic, right? There like you could very much, after watching Suicide Squad, predict what kind of moves Peacemaker would make in any given situation because he's again very dogmatic. But he's also like he was an obvious like biting of the thumb at the U.S. military complex and everything else there. And I thought that was such a great that was such a great character to show right now.
He's 2021's real Captain America,
right?
Like if we really made a Captain America, it'd be fucking Peacemaker.
Peacemaker was made as a mock of Captain America.
Yeah.
But and it works really, really well. I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, no, facts. I thought he was really good. Someone who I forget that I think like really the acting performance made him into one of the best villains I've ever seen on fucking television, film, whatever it may be. Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Jesus, that kid was hated across every dimension. If there are other dimensions, they got Game of Thrones. They hated him there.
He's still receiving shit that's being forcibly
so,
into dimensions.
Like, and I know that's kind of a wild one, but as we were sitting here thinking, I was like, who is a villain that I actually hated? Like somebody who I really was like, oh man, I just hate this motherfucker. And that was a big one, Joffrey.
Pretty good. Jacqueline Phoenix, when he first was really starting to come into prominence. He was a good villain there too.
Yeah, Savage said he retired after that show, which is crazy. Yeah. I don't think he should have retired. I know that a lot of people actually sent the dude who played Joffrey like hate that he should not have got it. He was a brilliant actor. He made us feel the way he was supposed to make us feel. We're supposed to hate that fucking guy.
That just means you're a great actor. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, he nailed that.
He was in The Dark Knight. I've seen that before. Batman talks to him on like the stool step. It's really crazy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Who has the best villains though? Marvel or DC? Or Disney?
Oh, curveball there.
Wow. Yeah.
I did used to have nightmares about Ursula.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go DC just because I think that's what's always been DC's strength is the fact that a lot of their protagonists are propped up by the challenges of their enemies, right? Like if you go down a list of like DC staples like Superman, Batman, they all have like top tier
says Disney is the ultimate villain.
But like in Marvel, like there's not that many. They're all collaborative villains, right? Like Iron Man doesn't necessarily have his own great standalone villains. Captain America, like Spider-Man really has the whole rogues gallery, if we're being honest.
Yeah, Spider-Man has one of the GOAT Marvel rogues galleries.
Yeah. But I think in DC, it's kind of like everyone has their own sort of like great villains where like, fuck man, when they all team up, it's a problem.
Yep. Jake, what about you? What do you DC?
I'm leaning towards DC myself, and I know I'm a DC fanboy, so you can take that with a grain of salt. I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think I will admit has been superior to the DC Cinematic
Not even
Universe,
close.
right? And so, but if I'm stacking them, just like comic books, TV shows, animated series, everything, like it's going to DC to me. Batman by himself is really close with Spider-Man. And then you still got to take into account all of Superman's rogue gallery, all of I mean, just
like there. You think there's some joke ones in there, but like Brainiac's really fucking cool.
Brainiac and Lex Luthor are hitters.
Yeah,
like those guys are hitters.
It's ironic because like Superman's most notorious villain is Lex Luthor, and as far as like strength is powers is concerned, it's not even close. Like you can't even mention him, but
he can wreck his day.
Right. And so it kind of reminds me of this great sort of dichotomy between like this all powerful, basically God versus this rich man. Yeah, exactly.
That's why I never got the beef when people were like, "Oh, fucking Batman versus Superman." Batman would just Superman's gonna just fucking, he's a god. How's Batman gonna? Yeah. And I'm like, bro, dude, Superman's main villain since the beginning of Superman has been a human being, a rich motherfucking dude.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Like that's how
they're not ready. They're not ready for that conversation.
And I think that the cool thing about I would have to agree with DC, right? Because when you have characters like, let's compare Lex Luthor to Norman Osborn. Okay, they're both rich businessmen. They both have a lot of things. I mean, you could
bit of a scientist myself.
Norman Osborn, you can throw in the Thunderbolts in there. That's a pretty cool factor. But like Lex Luthor, the reason that Lex Luthor is so damn cool is because Lex Luthor is the man whose ego is so fucking big that he thinks he can take on a fucking god, and that is realistic. Like that is the thing that is the scariest thing, is that if Superman existed, that there will be some fucking hyper masculine rich asshole that will be like, I'm better than this god, and that's exactly what he is, and he embodies all these amazing things. DC's got just a great rose gallery. Batman,
I'm Jeff Bezos, and I'm going to space.
Right. Yeah. Batman, for one, has an incredible rogues gallery. Even like the D-list villains in Batman are really fucking cool.
Yeah.
Flash is a high
in the Suicide Squad
gallery. You have the entire Suicide Squad.
Facts, even the D-list DC villains are in the Suicide Squad. They get a highlight. They literally get their own movie.
And Marvel has Thunderbolts, but they have not gotten that ball rolling at all. I mean, just the DC has just a plethora of villains, and that's why I've always been a fan of DC more. I've always said this. I'm a fan of DC over Marvel because I believe the villains in DC are better, and the villains make the heroes. The reason why I love Batman stuff, and I don't really like Batman, is because Batman is challenged by fantastic villains all the time. I really don't even care about what Batman can do about it. I care about what the villains are going to put him through and how he gets through that,
Right. Well, because then he's not a hero if he doesn't have anything to fight.
Yeah. But the Thunderbolts are kind of in the works right now. We've seen a little bit of that with the Madam Hydra stuff that we've been seeing, the Dark Avengers and all that kind of stuff. But that's more of a Legion of Doom kind of thing versus like the Suicide Squad kind of idea. But
which Legion of Doom, fucking awesome.
Yeah, Legion of Doom, also fucking awesome. And that's who I always thought, that would be a way for DC to separate itself out from Marvel, is don't make a big bad, make the big bad the Legion of Doom.
Yeah,
make it a big convoluted plot between all of these different villains.
I think DC should do more, and I think it is in a way with, you see how much clout they've given Harley and how much clout they've given Joker and stuff like that. I think DC knows its bread and butter is in its villains, like that they actually have more famous villains than Marvel does, right? And so they're like, while Captain America, Spider-Man, all these guys are household names, so is Joker, and so it's just one of those where like they can really focus on their villains and do a completely different style of cinematic universe. And so and I think a fucking they should have been leading to the Legion of Doom this entire time, or like that should have been their overall arc. I don't know what they were doing. I mean, I get Apocalypse is cool and everything, but like,
I agree.
It should have been Legion of Doom.
been the Legion of Doom. Should have been.
Yeah.
You know, you can maybe make Apocalypse the like big bad Thanos after 3 or 4 movies, and maybe like the first Justice League movie, like or the second
Yeah.
Justice League movie, something like that. But I think that the Legion of Doom is just a much better villain, and it could separate you from Marvel. You know, you could have a
Solomon
plot line.
Grundy.
Yeah, Solomon
there you go.
Grundy. Gosh,
Yeah.
you know, you got a Hulk. We got an undead zombie Hulk. So
There you go.
yeah. All right. Well, last question for you guys: does the villain define the hero, or the other way around? Jake, we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we were kind of talking about that. I do think villains define heroes in a way, because
Yeah.
I don't think you have the villains you don't have the villains without the heroes, but then heroes are really, they're reflections of their villains.
I mean,
and I know that sounds confusing.
I'll easily back this argument up. How many characters have Batman's powers?
Yeah, no, a lot. I mean,
and what makes Batman Batman? It's the fact that he goes up against the Joker or Killer Croc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why, I don't want to no shade at you, Dad, but why isn't there more people with Green Arrow merch? You know what I mean? It's because Batman's
Green
Rogue
Arrow's
Gallery.
the same Rogues Gallery. I agree.
Nowhere even close.
They share the Rogues Gallery in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much. There's tons of different overlap, and the same thing works with Superman too. How many Superman clones are there? And the reason those clones don't stick around is they don't build a good Rogues Gallery. There's been some that have done it lately, like Incredibles, which is Incredible, right? Invincible.
Yeah.
Invincible. But and the boys, but you really have to really build that, you know. And when you're working with, I do believe that the villain defines the hero.
Yeah.
Kev, what about you?
No, absolutely. I think Joker's. I think, and again, I'm using Joker because I think he is like the quintessential villain, right? Where like at the end of Dark Knight, where he's being pushed off the scaffolding or whatever, he's tied up. He goes, I think we're gonna do this for a very long time because you can't kill me. Basically, poking fun at Batman's moral code, and Joker saying, "I won't kill you because it's too much fun."
Yeah,
so they literally like tell the story of the bat, like together, like that. There is, you can't have any of that without the antagonist sort of, I guess, defining the hero, because that's ultimately what, like, if we're saying that here the difference between hero and villains is them being defined by their actions. Well, usually 9 times out of 10, the villain is born first, and then the hero is born in response, and then after that, then you sort of have this sort of weird domino effect where it switches, and then villains are born after that to challenge the hero, right? So it becomes this vacuum. So yeah, I think most definitely the villain for sure defines the hero.
Yep.
I mean, you're not a hero. You're not a hero without adversity, and you don't have adversity without villains in most comic books or anything like that. And so, like you said, I think Batman, Superman, all these guys. I mean, they wouldn't be who they are without their villains and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it's absolutely that way. I think the Rogues Gallery is the most important thing when defining a hero. You can have cool gadgets and cool tech and stuff like that for days, but like, here's an example of a hero that doesn't have a good Rogues Gallery that has had a hard time finding any footing, even though it's a huge blockbuster mega hit. Hulk.
Yeah.
Hulk has a terrible Rogues Gallery.
Hulk's Rogues Gallery's trash.
There's not really. Most of them are just other Hulks, right?
Yeah.
You have Brain, which is a super smart one, which
Abomination, right?
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And like his whole argument with the Brain is like something that's really kind of like, what are you teaching kids? That you can just muscle your way through everything? Like, this guy's clearly smarter, and he's smarter in the ways that Hulk is. I don't know. It's a really weird Rogues Gallery, and because of it, there hasn't been a really successful Hulk movie. I love The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton. That's just me. Obviously, it was just.
I thought it was great too. That was the best one. Yeah.
I liked it. Honestly, I'm not going to shit on any Hulk movie. I've watched them all, and when they came out, I was probably, for most of them, a child, and still enjoyed them then. And that's who they were made for. So
True. It's true. But still, hard to get a legacy, hard to get a real good story with the Hulk.
Yeah. The
You
Hulk
know?
has not gotten its footing. I mean, the only way he's been such a almost a side character in the Avenger films, but I mean, he's a welcome one. Obviously, he's a key part of the Avengers. But yeah, dude, his rogue gallery's trash.
Absolute
It's like the
trash.
same with like, and I think it's like I think stuff like that where Hulk is basically supposed to be this unstoppable force,
Yeah.
and it just feels like it's weird that like, okay, well, how do we stop an unstoppable force? I don't know. Let's do another unstoppable force as its
Right.
villain. You know, like
Yeah.
obviously you don't
Yeah.
have to do that. You see it with Superman and Lex Luthor and so on and so forth.
It's gimmicky, but also Hulk is not smart, and so it's not like he can like figure it out with his wit, like Superman can, like Hulk's like,
Yeah.
I do one thing and that's smash.
10 out of
And
10
that-
times the answer is smash. Yeah. Like,
Well, and that's why I think it may be a little unfair at the Hulk because you could also argue that maybe just out of consequence for what he is, he can be an anti-hero in that respect.
yeah.
Yeah, in
It's
some
like,
ways.
he's literally just hulking out, right?
Marvel's taking him to the full hero with Professor Hulk now because now their banner has like kind of full, control over Hulk. It's they're together, right? And so I think Marvel's made him a full hero, but definitely in the earlier versions and also in the comic book, I mean, Hulk's definitely been an anti-hero. I mean, even in Old Man Logan, Hulk is an antagonist. Like Hulk is a straight on villain. The Hulk's own like all of California and have a bunch of incest families that run shit. And so like in Old Man Logan, like the Hulk is definitely, which the Hulk's been a villain in multiple Wolverine comic books. And so honestly, like that's what I would love to see play out on screen when the MCU can finally revamp up, because you got to give it a few years, I think, before we can reboot the Wolverine franchises and stuff. But next time they get a good Wolverine, let him fight the Hulk. I want to see that shit.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I agree.
All right. Well, that'll about wrap it up for our deep dive this